It took Jesus' bravery to wash the feet of his disciples. In those moments of service, in those moments of washing feet, God is visible. Hi everyone, Angelo here. I'm a creative and theologian, and it's Holy Thursday. So we're in chapter 13 of John. And this story here definitely makes up the biggest story of Christianity. So on Holy Thursday, we celebrate what is known as the Last Supper. And that is what this story is about here. So in John's version, it happens just before the Passover. So he starts off by saying it was before the festival of the Passover. And Jesus knew that his time has come. And the story talks about how much he would love, but then that in this moment he showed how perfect his love was. So while they were at table, or just before they ate, he took his clothes off and he went into service mode. He washed the feet of the disciples. He took on the role of a servant. And Peter and all was like, "You gonna wash my feet?" And Jesus was like, "Well, yeah, I have to." And he's like, "No, man, you ain't washing my feet. You gonna never wash my feet." And Jesus is like, "Bro, I need to do this. Because if I don't do this, you could have no part of me." So then Jesus says, Peter, sorry, is like, "Well, then wash all of man." Jesus is like, "It ain't gonna be all that. But you clean, and not everybody clean." And he talking here about Judas, right? So then when he's finished, he explains to them, "Always call me teacher and master, and yes, you're right. But if I could do this for you, then you yourself need to do this for others." So we've reached the beginning of the end. And as we know, this is the Easter Triduum we celebrate in here. So for the next 3 to 4 days, we are celebrating, or participating rather, in a much more intentional way than we would any other time of the year. We're participating in the Last Supper like we are today, then Jesus' Passion, which will be tomorrow, his death and resurrection. So it would, of course, be a Saturday into Sunday, or Saturday night into Sunday, however you want to count it. But as we know, there's a couple big things that happen in this story, right? And then the first is, of course, the Last Supper. And then the second is, of course, Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And these two major things that come out of this story raise two major things for me. And the first is the importance of being present and using your time wisely. And the second is about entering into heaven. And as I'm sure you already know, for Catholics, it doesn't get much more entry into heaven than this story. Because this story is central to, who we are is central to our Eucharistic theology. So the story says that in this moment, Christ showed how perfect his love was. Or another way we might think about it is he showed how grand, how whole his love was, how complete. And of course, we know how major this moment in general was, right? Because we could look back now, 2,000 years later, and we could retrospect. But in this moment, happening in real time as it was happening, if Christ wasn't present to his disciples and to his situation, he might have let this moment pass by. But instead, Christ used his time wisely, being conscious of what's happening in the here and now. Now, maybe it's just me, so I might be only speaking for myself here. But I could definitely say that there have been times in my own life where I have let opportune moments pass by. For whatever reason, it could have been nerves, it could have been different priorities, but most times it would be nerves. And I think it comes from a fear of being vulnerable to the other, being vulnerable to another person or other people. And I imagine this is something that we all experience, or at least occasionally. Because Christ was super vulnerable in this moment here. And we saw, his vulnerability wasn't just seamlessly received. Peter pushed back, right? But Christ kept heart in this moment. And he followed through with his divine vibes. He felt this call in his heart to do something. And he followed that call. He embodied following that call from conception to resurrection. And the same heart that God put into Jesus, God also put into us. The same spirit that Christ embodied is the same spirit that Christ breathed on us. So when we follow our divine vibes, when we follow God's call in our lives, then no matter what, we are assured that God is with us. God is about bravery in the face of fear. And let's remember that bravery isn't the absence of fear, but more so bravery is following God's call in spite of being afraid. Every time you're brave, you open the door for God in your life. It took bravery for Peter to have his feet washed. It would have even taken Judas a certain level of bravery to follow through on betraying Christ. Although, to be honest, if Judas were to have more bravery than it took for him to betray Jesus, then he would not have betrayed Jesus, and instead he would have continued to follow Christ, in spite of all the fear and all his doubts he may have had. And then, of course, it took Jesus' bravery to wash the feet of his disciples and not to run away when he could have, because he had every right to run away, and he could have if he wanted to, but he chose to remain brave-hearted and stay. Christ followed his heart, even when he couldn't see where it was leading. And the thing is, especially in John makes it seem like Christ is super composed throughout this whole passion process. Like, it seems like he is in control of everything. But trust and believe, as is fundamental Christian theology, Christ is fully human and fully divine. So because he's human just like us, he would have responded as any human would, as any one of us would. But it took heart for him to be brave. It took heart for everyone to be brave. And even if everybody, talking about Judas in particular, even if everybody didn't have enough heart still won out in the end. Because we know what Easter Sunday brings. Because again, we could look back in retrospect. At the time, who's to say what was the thoughts going through everyone's head? But heart always wins in the end. So speaking of heart, moving on to the second point. There's this song that's close to my heart called Jano Partial, and that's from Cultural Roots. And in that song, they get to preaching about entering into God's presence. And they say it's not about the work you do or the way people might see you. The line they use is only one way you can enter, is with clean hands and pure in heart. And it makes so much sense because that is exactly what this story is about, clean hands and a pure heart. Because the only way to enter into heaven, again, as this story shows, is with clean hands and a pure heart. For us as Catholics, this story here, this moment is nothing less than heaven. Because this story is major to who we are as a people of faith. Christ invites us into heaven with clean hands and a pure heart. And notice how this story, this invitation isn't for sometime later on. This invitation is for today. This invitation is for right now. The idea of cleanliness, though, and purity, it's not about moralism at all. Let's not make that mistake. Because for it to be about moralism is the furthest thing from the truth. To use any aspect of Christianity to be judgmental or to judge others, that is the equivalent of Judas betraying Christ. So we talked about the pure heart part already, still keeping in mind the song, right? We talked about the pure heart part already. That a pure heart is a good heart. A pure heart is a brave heart. And to get clean hands, you get that by starting with washing the feet of others. The only way for us to get clean hands in this life is to get them dirty serving others. And if you ask anyone who knows anything about genuine service, they will tell you the same thing. And there are so many different ways to serve others. There's no one way, there's no better or worse way. I mean, there's so many different ways. And we all have different gifts and talents that we can contribute in ways that only we can, in ways that God has ordained that only we as individuals can contribute toward the greater community, toward the greater good, contribute toward, well, the church, all of humanity. But no one's service is better or worse than any others, as long as it's pure and genuine. It's all about laying down that puzzle piece that God would have given us. God put a puzzle piece in our heart at our conception, and in order to build the entire puzzle, we all need to lay down our puzzle piece. But God watches the heart that we serve others with. And again, you can ask anyone who genuinely serves others in those moments of service, in those moments of washing feet, God is visible. In those moments, God is tangible. And in those moments, the Word is made flesh and dwells among us. So strive for clean hands and a pure heart. And strive to be present and to use your time wisely. And what those look like for you in practical ways, that's something only you can discover for your own self. That's something only you can discern through the help of God. Of course, either communally or individually, but ultimately it's up to you to then take action on that. But it takes time and it takes practice. But trust and believe that it is worth it. There's nothing less than an invite into heaven. Anyways, that's it from me for today. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.